This is Greg Lambert here, and I am delighted today to be joined by an old friend and foe at times, I have to say.
At times.
At times. The Odyssey Pro Wrestling champion, the Morecambe Wrestling champion, Ryan Hunter. How are you doing, Ryan?
Hi, Greg. How are you? I'm good. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thanks for having me on.
I'm doing well. Thanks very much for coming on. We're going to have quite an in-depth chat about your wrestling career, particularly your wrestling career in Morecambe. And we're also going to talk later on about a big match coming up, Odyssey Pro Wrestling, April the 9th, War on the Shore, Alhambra Live, as it's now known.
That's the one.
You defending that title against Andre Dekker and RP Davies.
RPD, yeah.
So we'll talk about that. But let's start at the beginning. Let's find out a little bit about your origins as a wrestler and your first memory of watching pro wrestling and knowing that that was something that you wanted to do.
How did I first get into wrestling? It was through my dad. My first memory of wrestling was he put on an old videotape, that's how long ago it was, of Austin versus McMahon, their whole feud, and that just instantly got me hooked. If there's a feud that is going to get you hooked into wrestling, I think that is the one to watch, because the length of it, how in depth it was, and how it got just fans believed it was an employee against a boss, and it's something that everyone in the world can relate to, not getting along with the boss, I think. So it's a feud there that everyone could relate to, and for one, it's like even as like a younger child, it was like I visioned it as a school kid and a teacher, how you didn't get along with that teacher that you had, and they clashed, and it just got me hooked instantly. And then I went on to watch it more with my dad during the night, seeing wrestlers like The Undertaker, Mankind, and he was showing me old tapes of the Attitude Era, and from then on I've been hooked ever since.
So did you know at that point that was something that you actually wanted to do yourself, that you wanted to be a wrestler, or did that come later?
I wouldn't say instantly. At first I was just taken back, and at first I don't think I quite understood what I was watching, but I knew that it was something that I loved and would love for a long time. And after, I'd say, a few more years of finally watching more recent wrestling, like my more childhood like heroes, like your John Cena's, your Batistas, your Randy Orton's, your Bobby Lashley's. That was sort of my time where I realised, like, wow, this is something I'd like to sink my teeth into. And at the time, didn't know that British wrestling was actually an ongoing thing. Didn't know it actually existed in this country. I just thought it was a big show in America, that you had to be in America to be a professional wrestler. But was I wrong?
So you're from Blackpool originally, and Blackpool's a great wrestling town. I mean, there's so many great wrestlers have come from Blackpool, yeah. William Regal being the most famous, and a lot of entertainment, a seaside town. What was it like growing up? Was there a lot to do? And did you go to see any wrestling in Blackpool?
Obviously, Blackpool's a seaside town, a tourist town, always things to do, going out and about, from Pleasure Beach to the Promenade. But my first British wrestling show, it was called Best of British Wrestling. It was in the Horseshoe Bar at the Pleasure Beach. And I actually won free tickets on Radio Wave, it was at the time. I won the free tickets, and I was like my mum entered me in the competition and we won it. And she told me, you're going to watch wrestling tonight at the Pleasure Beach. And obviously, my first thought was, what are WWE doing at the Pleasure Beach? Because I didn't realise that British wrestling was going on. But I went there, and who were some of the wrestlers on there? I think there was a guy called Bad Boy Joey Naylor, Kid Crazy, Steve Morocco were part of the team at the time, and they also had he was signed to TNA at the time. Nick Aldis was on the show, and it completely blew me away to see wrestling live and up that close. Because obviously I'd been to a WWE show at the time, but sat in the nosebleeds. But to be that close to wrestling, it blew me away to know you could be that up close and personal and see the workings of how everything works, sort of thing, and to know that this wouldn't have just been the only show going on, that there's more out there to wrestling than the WWE.
And what about yourself at school? Were you into sport as a kid? Were you into any kind of combat sports, martial arts, anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, while I was at school, I did Taekwondo at the time. I'm actually a black belt in Taekwondo. So that was my sort of sport and martial art growing up. But then I sort of, when I got to about 14 maybe, I sort of like started to fizzle out and I weren't enjoying it as much. And then I went to another wrestling show in Blackpool. It was called Nitro Pro Wrestling Alliance. And that had your Chris Travises, your Noam Dars, your Joey Hayes, Lionheart, all on there. And that was, I went from that, seeing that sort of like, people call it like a camp level show, to an actual independent British wrestling show. And then that was when I knew that this was something I wanted to do.
So what about starting training then to be a pro wrestler? Like you say, you discovered British wrestling, you realise that's a thing, you know it's something you want to do. How did you go about getting into it?
So I spoke to Lionheart and Noam Dar after the MPWA show, and they gave me a Facebook page for a guy called Dave Rain. And I dropped him a message online and asked him where's good to train around the Northwest. And he gave me 2 places. He gave me Future Shock. Oh no, he gave me 3 places: Future Shock, GPW, and XWA. So I found someone else from Blackpool who was training wrestling at the time called Alan Wild, and he was training at the XWA, and he let me jump in the car with him, come to one training session, and the rest is history.
And I remember this very well because, I mean, I guess this would be, when would this be? Would this be about 10 years ago, about 2012?
2012 it was, yeah.
So had I finished promoting at that point, XWA, or was it before that, or was it just after?
I started 4 weeks before your final Vendetta show.
Right.
So yeah,
June, July 2012, thereabouts.
Yeah, that was the one.
How old were you then, Ryan?
I'd been 15 at the time, 15, 16. Yeah, just going on 16, I think I was.
I've heard you do another interview where you talk about that Vendetta show. Did that make quite a big impression on you?
Massive. I'd never seen nothing like it in my life up to that point. It was that show for me still sticks in my memory to this day. Half the crowd was GPW, half the crowd was XWA. I'd been to other independent shows at the time, but I'd never seen fans like that at all. I'd never seen stories like it. I'd never seen crowd interaction like it. The whole show felt like one big panto where the crowd were involved in the show. The crowd weren't watching that show. The crowd were part of that show, and that's what made it special.
Yeah, they certainly were. So you're training at that point at Regent Park Studios, the wrestling training school. And you mentioned Alan Wild. Who else would have been there at the time then? Who else was training with you at the time?
So there was me, Alan Wild, Craig Collins, Sean Vasey, Rasayan, John Agro, Jinx. Did I say Ryan Grayson? Ryan Grayson, and that was the core plaster there at that moment in time. And later on, actually joined the guy who wrestled 2 weeks was Andre Dekker.
So how did you find the training? So coming into it for the first time, how did it feel physically at first?
My God. If there's any man who can put someone through the paces, no matter weight, shape, size or form, it's Johnny Phere.
So Johnny Phere, he was the head trainer in Morecambe at the time.
That man,
former XWA champion.
I didn't know what I was getting into, but that man, he nearly made me throw up in my first session. Put it that way, yeah. I was nearly throwing up. He pushed me to my limit, but even when I finished the session, I knew that I'm definitely coming back. No matter how much this psychotic warrior pushed me and made me feel physically sick by the amount of fitness, it was something I was sticking with and pushing through. Because at the time when I was at that age, I was an overweight, very overweight as a 16-year-old lad. Before I was putting on weight constantly, and it wasn't until Johnny Phere actually sat you down and said to you, like, made you understand the fitness involved with wrestling to go with the character, the showmanship. You need to be in shape and maybe not look it, but you need to be physically fit to be able to do wrestling.
So how much would you have weighed at that point as a 16-year-old?
See, I don't quite know when I was 16. I don't know how much I weighed, but when I was 18 was when, I think it was when it went from XWA to Page Promotions to Alpha Omega. And when it got to Alpha Omega, I sat down with the promoter at the time, and he told me that it was a think about eventually putting me on shows. And I think I was 18, 19 years old, and I was weighing 20 stone. So, and that's when he told me that I would be working my way up to being on the shows eventually, but it gave me the real kick in the backside that I needed to push and realise that I can't do this in the shape I'm in. I need to go to the gym. I need to work outside of training as much as I was working in training.
So just in terms of the timeline, so I finished promoting XWA in 2012, and then Johnny Phere, who you mentioned, was the head trainer and training you at the wrestling training school in Morecambe. He started running paid promotions in 2013, and then the promoter you're talking about who sat you down a little while later was Charles Nelson Riley, Kieran, who took over paid promotions in 2014, which eventually became Alpha Omega Wrestling.
Alpha Omega.
Sorry, there's been a lot of Morecambe wrestling name changes over the years. I know I'm partly to blame, but it's just so people who are watching and listening understand how that came about. So Charles Nelson Riley sits you down and he tells you, "I've got faith in you. I'm gonna put you on a show." This would be when, about early 2015, something like that.
Early 2015-ish, yeah, definitely. It was. I was still the cameraman at the time for the shows, so I was still going to the shows, still helping set up, like build the sets, build the ring, and then I'd be the cameraman on the shows. And he came to me and he said that he could tell, like, because I'd been there so long, the fans had seen me at every show. I'd be one of the first ones in, last ones out. The fans had seen me, got to know me on a sort of personal level, and he could see that there was something there where the fans could. I can't think of the word, sort of
like relate to you.
Before, yeah, they related to me. They knew me before I was on the show as a wrestler, so it was an easy way to get me onto the shows through this whole cameraman storyline that I had.
So you're talking about being about 20 stone. What did you do from then on? You know you're going to debut on the show. You know it's later in the year. What do you actually do in terms of training and diet and physically to get that weight off?
So literally, Charles must have told me on the Sunday. On the Monday, I started a full new diet. I went online, looked for what was best. It was more just a trial and everything at first. Like, obviously, eating the right amount of protein, right amount of carbs, right amount of calories. I joined a gym that was totally new to me. I started lifting weights. And then eventually Charles, we had an old church where we had a ring set up, and he brought in different wrestlers from around Britain to come and train us. And another Blackpool lad, Sam Gradwell, came and taught us on many sessions. And you've seen Sam; he's in tremendous shape. So he sat me down and he actually helped me a lot with dieting and what I should be doing in the gym. And within 9 months, I went from 20 stone to about 13 and a half.
Wow.
And lost about 6.5 stone through doing HIIT training, weights, waking up before I had work at 6 in the morning. I'd wake up at 4:30 and go for a run because I had this. When I was training at first at Page Motion, I never quite saw the vision or the light at the end of the tunnel to get on the show. I just was going through the motions constantly, going to training and on a Sunday, but Monday to Saturday was just being Ryan, just going out at the weekends, doing a lot of drinking at the time and takeaways that I probably shouldn't have been if I wanted to get on shows eventually. But when Charles showed me that this is where you can go, this is how we're going to get you on the shows, it sort of gave me a whole new motivation to spur myself on and totally change my life.
Well, I was working,
changed my wrestling career, changed my life as a whole.
Yeah, because I was working for Alpha Omega at the time, and I noticed the transformation in you. Did you? When you say it changed your life, did it change your levels of confidence as well?
Confidence, just socialising more. I was a very shy, overweight kid. I lost this weight. I became more confident in myself. I was a lot less shy. I was, as weird as I was going out speaking to girls more because it was something I'd never done. I was a shy, little scared kid, and I'd lost all this weight. I felt great. I felt healthier than ever, felt better than ever, and it then translated to the wrestling too. I then felt I'd always been scared about going in front of a crowd and stuff like that, but when I'd lost this weight, I had this whole new confidence to just, I wanted to be there, I wanted to be in a ring, I wanted to be in front of the fans, I wanted to give it my all, and that's exactly what I did.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done my research. So I think your debut was October 2015.
Yeah, October the 11th, 2015.
October the 11th, Revelation. And this was at the Winter Gardens. The shows were at this amazing, grand old theatre, the Winter Gardens in Morecambe at that
venue.
point. What was that like? What was it like wrestling at the Winter Gardens in Morecambe?
There's actually a picture of an old friend Craig Hermit took, and it's me. We'd set the ring up, set the chairs up, and it's me just looking over the whole of the Winter Gardens. It's one of my favourite photos. I've still got him. I think I've got a picture of my room, because it's just me literally taking in this old historic venue that had wrestling. Do you know how long has wrestling been going on at the Winter Garden previously?
It would go back to probably the 1930s, I would say.
Exactly. Like, I was just thinking about who had been in there, what wrestlers had come and gone, and now finally, me, a kid who started at the age of 15, overweight, turned his entire life around and was going to debut at this venue. It was absolutely mind-blowing.
And the story which was being told at the time was you were going up against the villains who were kind of, you're a cameraman, you don't belong in the ring. They were kind of bullying you a little bit, bullying the character Ryan Hunter, and you were the big underdog. And do you feel that was part of the reason why the crowd got behind you? They also, like you said, they related to you for having seen you sort of come through, but the underdog story seemed to be a big part of things in your early time wrestling in Morecambe. Massive
part, yeah. It was like you say, everyone can relate. Everyone loves an underdog. Everyone loves an underdog. So to the fans to see, like I said, when the story first started, I was very overweight, so they've seen me be bullied by these villains at the time. But then I'd come back each show 2 months later, I'd be 2 stone lighter. Come back another 2 months, I'd be another stone lighter. They see me progress and show that you can overcome bullying and being put down and put in the work, and it pays off. And they could see me grow from cameraman to wrestler within the nearly 12 months of the story. Because it was 12 months between the story starting and my actual debut. And they seen that whole thing grow, and they definitely related to it, because on that night there was many other wrestlers on that show, but the cameraman got one of the biggest reactions of the night.
Well, this is it. I mean, at that time, if we're kind of looking at wrestling today and British wrestling today, and some of the people who were on that show or around that time, not necessarily on that show, but around that time, talking people like James Drake, who's now with NXT.
Dave Mastiff.
Yeah. Nikki Cross, or Nikki Ash, as she's now known, on Raw. Viper, who's now Doudrop.
Yeah.
On Raw. Sam Gradwell, who you mentioned before, who's with NXT UK. So, it was a really... what was that like, kind of being around, all these experienced, wrestlers in the dressing room?
See, these wrestlers have done it for years. They've got all this experience, but wrestlers look after each other, and they were very, I was very, very nervous, but I sat and spoke with Sam before I went out, and it was very reassuring. Told me that reminded me how long I'd been training for this, what work I'd put in, and it's definitely spurred me on, and it made it a lot easier.
Now, one of your first big rivalries in Alpha Omega wrestling at the Winter Gardens was against, I think you mentioned him before, Ryan Grayson. Laird Grayson, I think, as he was at the time, who was like the big villain in Morecambe, with the referendum and the very sort of pro, very, very sort of nationalistic Scottish, patriot that he was at the time. And you had this big match at War on the Shore in 2016. A Kiss the Flag match. Tell us a little bit about that. Match.
Oh, that was special. Like I say, again, wasn't the main event of the show, wasn't the marquee match, so to speak, but it was someone, they had Laird Grayson on one side, who the fans detested. Like, I've never seen fans actually hate someone like they quite hated Laird Grayson. And this little underdog who debuted 2-3 shows ago and had been they'd seen come along all along this way, and the crowd was incredible. One of the biggest attendance we had at Alpha Omega at the time. I think it was well over 300 people at the time, and the noise in that winter garden was unmatched.
Yeah, I mean, he then went on to end the stick streak later that year and become the champion. And we'll come back. He became the champion, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah. Because towards the end of 2016, our paths crossed a little bit, and I kind of got it in my head at the time that, you know, who is this lad? Does he really deserve to be here? And I started, because I was a manager at the time, Alpha Omega Wrestling. I was bringing different people in to wrestle you and try and beat you without, and I have to say this now, Ryan, without any success whatsoever. Because, you know, by that point, you really had, you know, you'd gradually improved and you really were becoming a really, really good wrestler. And I'll let you into a little exclusive now, because I walked away from Morecambe Wrestling in 2017. And I'll tell you now, face to face, part of the reason for that was I just thought to myself, I'm not going to get the better of this kid. I'm really not. So, you know, well, I have revealed that publicly there for the first time, Ryan.
You said that, yeah. I'm going to record that and keep that
covered. So there we are. And after I'd gone, you just kind of went from strength to strength. But you had this rivalry with your mentor, or one of your mentors, Sam Gradwell, as well.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what happened there.
So at first I had a feud with Dean McManus at the time. So I had an ongoing feud with him, and Sam Gradwell was feuding with a tag team called Hellbound. And Sam, obviously being a Blackpool lad, he was one of my good friends. He was against a 2-on-1 situation. So I was maybe pushing a bit too hard to be his tag partner at the time. But when Sam needed it, I was always there, and I went and helped him. And unfortunately, on one of the shows, we were teaming against Hellbound, and I got a little too cocky, and we didn't get the victory in the end, and I took the pin. And I put my hands up. At the time, I was an eager, young, enthusiastic kid, and I got involved when I shouldn't have. And Sam was the most famous one. But at the time, Sam then turned his back on the Morecambe fans and myself and attacked me after the match. And after that, it was about a 9-month-long feud between ourselves before we finally actually met in the ring. It was the Golden Chance Rumble was the show before we actually had the match, and I had won the Golden Chance trophy. I'd entered number 1. 5 minutes into the Golden Chance Rumble, I broke my shoulder and went on for another 25 minutes and won. So, the following show, Sam challenged me to a match for the Golden Chance trophy, where eventually we wrestled for a good 15 minutes, but eventually I came out on top and kept my trophy, and again earned Sam's respect of a guy who's done this for over 10 years now. And that meant a lot to finally have Sam stand there, shake my hand and tell me that I'm where I belong.
So you battled through injury to win that match, to beat Sam Gradwell, and then from there you become the Alpha Omega Wrestling champion. You cash in that Golden Chance trophy and you become the champion. So how old would you have been when you became the Morecambe Wrestling champion the first time?
I think I was 20. I was 20 at the time, yeah. So I'd gone on, I'd won the Golden Chance trophy.
You'd be the youngest ever at that point. Because I think Craig Collins was previously the youngest.
Craig Collins, and then Craig Collins was previously youngest, and then I snatched that away from him. So I'd won the Golden Chance trophy, and then I decided I would defend that trophy on shows against the best in Britain at the time. I defended it against Dylan Roberts, Sonna Durson. Who else was there? Was Robert Wishart, and then I defended it against a guy you just mentioned, was Craig Collins. I wrestled a 25-minute match, probably one of my favourite matches I've ever had against Craig Collins. And that man can go. He put me through my paces, he pushed me to my limit, but eventually I came out on top. So after the match, the guy we spoke about, Leg Grayson, popped up with a big Scottish steel chair and smashed me straight over the back, tried to leave and scurry. I grabbed that trophy, I placed it straight in the centre of the ring, and I cashed in straight after my 25-minute match with Greg Collins. I went on for another 10 minutes with Greg Grayson. He came this close from snatching me chances away, but I hit him with my finisher at the time and got 1, 2, 3 in the Morecambe crowd, and absolutely mental. They finally led Grayson had been taken down by this kid they've seen grown over the years, and I was the Alpha Omega champion.
So this is towards the end of 2018. So Grayson's been the champion at this point for nearly 2 years, and he's sort of cheated his way through and beaten everybody. And you've just kind of gained momentum show by show, and the crowd is like massively behind you at this point. And you're having, I mean, one thing I noticed, I came back, War on the Shore 2018, Alpha Omega very kindly. That was the night they inducted him into the Hall of Fame. And you mentioned that match with Sona Dursun. And that was the match of the night. And you were having like the match of the night at that point on the shows. What would you say? What could you finger point? What is the reason why you'd kind of improved to that point that you're having the match of the night and you become the Alpha Omega Wrestling champion and the fans are so behind you? What's aligned? How have the stars aligned for you at this point, Ryan?
Around that, just before the start of that year, it was the promoter at the time, Charles Nelson Riley. We were going to this church every week, and we were putting the work in, a small group of lads training every week. But then Charles, he sat us all aside, and he decided that he was going to, off his own back, off his own money, putting his petrol in his own car. He wasn't charging us. He was putting us up at his house at the weekend. He'd get us all in the car, and we'd drive around from training school to training school around Britain, from Future Shock to Infinite to Target Pro Wrestling, all up to Scotland to train with different wrestlers, doing seminars, training sessions, and then just to see how good the other trainees were at the time at these training schools pushed me on to be levels above. And I'd go to these training sessions, I'd want to be the best in every training session. And I thought, if I'm doing that in every training session, I'm doing that on every show. I'm not just going to go through the motion and be the mid-card match. I'm making everyone on that, every fan on that show and every wrestler on that show realise that I'm going on that show to the match of the night every night.
I mean, you mentioned Charles Nelson Riley a few times, and he was a great supporter of all the wrestlers. He was so supportive, like you said. I can't thank
that man enough. Is the amount that man has done for me is, I can't put it to words. Is an absolute gent. It
was like a little community, wasn't it? The way you kind of
it was a family.
Molded Alpha Omega Wrestling like a family. Yeah, you're absolutely.
It was a family. Like we'd all. Like Kieran had a house. He'd put a number of the workers up in his house. Wouldn't charge anything. Wouldn't ask for money for food. He did it because he wanted to. He wasn't a promoter. He was a friend, and he was one of my best friends. He sat. We'd stay the night before the shows. We'd all go set up together. We'd go back after the show, go back to his house, or get the takeaway and have a few drinks at the time. And it was a family. It was a family, and it was special.
So how did you feel towards the end of 2018 when Kieran, Charles Nelson Riley, announces that he doesn't want to be a wrestling promoter anymore and he's going to close down Alpha Omega Wrestling?
It did hurt at first. It hurt at first because it was special. It was very, very special. I've not had there's not been many shows I've been at like Alpha Omega was, and it did hurt at the time, but it was only for Charles's best interest at the time. I spoke to him as a friend, spoke to him for many hours about his reasons behind it, and eventually I did support his decision because he needed to go on to the next chapter of his own life, and he'd done more than enough for a lot of people.
So after that, 2019, Target Wrestling from Carlisle, they're running shows at the Carlton, as it's then known. So the shows now probably should go backwards. 2017, I think it was the start of 2017, the shows, or maybe the end of 2016, the shows had moved from the Winter Gardens to the Carlton, where they had been previously with XWA several years before.
Back home.
Yeah, so they're now at the Carlton, and Target Wrestling from Carlisle come along in 2019. How was that? Did it feel the same? Because you were part of those shows.
I was part of both, yeah. The fans still came, but it just didn't have that family feeling. It didn't feel like... The shows were great, don't get me wrong. Target Wrestling ran Morecambe for a full year when no one else could, and I'll always thank them for that. They kept Morecambe Wrestling going and kept it alive.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like Morecambe in a way. It just felt like any other show in Morecambe. It felt like wrestling in Morecambe rather than Morecambe Wrestling.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Oh,
it was wrestling in Morecambe, not Morecambe Wrestling, because Morecambe Wrestling is its own entity. It's special. It's I can't put it into words what it is. It's different.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. You're going to get me emotional here, Ryan, if you keep talking about that. So tell me about how Odyssey Pro Wrestling came about. Were you planning Odyssey Pro Wrestling before the COVID pandemic started?
Yes.
Because you're involved. Just to make it clear, you're involved in the actual organising,
the running of the shows. Yeah,
shows as well.
Me and three other people. There's Liam, Ricky, and Ethan are all involved in running Morecambe. It was a bigger group to start with, but then it's fiddled down to the core four of us. It's really working. So before the pandemic, we actually had a show booked. It was all booked, all the rest of it booked, and then bang, COVID hit. We'd been planned, so then we couldn't run our first show for another year and a half, 2 years, I think it was. But we'd had this show. This show had just been a vision of ours for, I'd say, nearly 3 years, because we were planning it a year before COVID hit, because obviously a lot, as you're aware, Greg, a lot of planning goes into a wrestling show. So we were planning. So before we actually had our first show set sail, it'd been nearly 3 years in the making, I think. And so the planning that goes into it, like I say, we had to at first we had a show planned. We'd gone around, we'd posted, we'd flyered, we'd sold tickets for the show, but then COVID hit, so it was like resetting again. Then we got a slight feeling that COVID might be stopping again. Started planning again, got posted made, started book wrestlers. Second wave hit. It wasn't until eventually all the lockdown restrictions had been lifted that we actually thought, right, this is all or nothing here. We go for it. We give it one last big chance, and hopefully we can run the show. And we did, and it was if I do say so myself, it was a great success.
And what did you do yourself during the COVID pandemic? Because we had a lockdown. I mean, there was pretty much, we couldn't do anything. We could barely leave the house for several months in 2020, and a lot of people struggling. A lot of people in wrestling, British wrestling, struggling because you've got people who do it for a full-time living. They can't because there's no live entertainment. You've got people struggling because they can't go to the gym. They can't work out. You've got people struggling with their mental health because, wrestling is all they want to do and they can't do it. How did it affect you, and what were you doing during that period of time?
It had a massive effect on me, like physically and mentally. Mentally, because like you say, we just felt like we were getting the ball rolling again. I was getting Morecambe Wrestling back, and it just got hit with this pandemic. Like I say, all I wanted to do at the time was go and wrestle, improve, get maybe I was just as Alpha Omega was finishing and joined Target, and I was just getting a ball rolling for myself more as well. I was starting to get bookings around the UK, in Scotland, in Liverpool, in Manchester, all around the place, and it just felt like a big bump in the road, because that you'd never thought you were going to get over. It was, like I say, being stuck inside, not being able to go to, like I say, a gym had become a second passion of mine, and I'd love to go to the gym. It was good, not only physically, but mentally, to release a bit of a release, bit of me time. But then I had to go and try and, I couldn't get the same motivation to go and work out in my back garden. I couldn't get the same motivation to work out in my bedroom. It just wasn't, going to the gym was my free time, and it was just for me and the weights, and it just wasn't the same. It was, I would do home workouts, but I'd do for 3 days. I'd be like, on the fourth, fifth day, maybe I'd be like, I just couldn't be bothered getting out of bed. I'd sit there, I'd watch wrestling, but it just hurt, if you know what I mean. I sort of, during the pandemic, I'm not gonna lie, I was nearly falling out of love with wrestling, just because I felt like there was no end game. There was nothing. I felt like this pandemic was just going forever. There'd been no shows. I didn't know what the answer was. Yeah,
that's how I felt. I felt very similar. What were you working at that point? Were you working in your other jobs?
At the time, I had to join my main job at the time. Closed down. I then had to get a job in a supermarket. So I was just there I was there 5 days a week. So after obviously going into a place that was high risk with COVID at the time, then feeling bad about going home, going to work, finishing work at this job that I didn't want to do. I was going there miserable. I didn't want to work in this age, but it's not what I wanted to do myself. So I wanted to go and wrestle. So to go there, go to a Sainsbury's at the time supermarket, coming home, I didn't feel like a wrestler anymore. I didn't feel like an athlete. I just felt like I didn't feel like I could do anything. So to come home and try and lift up much lighter dumbbells than I had at the gym and try to get something out of it, it just wasn't hitting the same. Really wasn't hitting the same.
But restrictions were lifted and things did start to get slowly back to normal. And this show that you've had in your mind, the four of you, for so long, probably best part of 18 months to 2 years, you've had this show.
2 years,
this vision for a show, and it eventually happens.
Yeah. So I sat down.
Sail. When was it? August 2021, is that right?
August 2021, yeah. So it was obviously I'd got a bit more out of shape, but obviously during the pandemic, and it was Vic Marcus, another wrestler from Odyssey Pro Wrestling, sat down at the time, and he helped motivate me again and helped me. He told me that this is something that you're good at, and it's not something you should give up on, and put your mind to it, and you can be exactly back where you was. And here we are a year later, and I'm Odyssey Pro Wrestling champion, back to exactly where I was.
What was that first show like? Did it feel like Morecambe Wrestling was back?
Special is the word. Special is the only word I can think to describe Morecambe Wrestling, and it was back with a bang. The people you may know, the Morecambe Divas, were back in full swing. That's the thing with Morecambe. They've got these two rows of fans who are. It's not just a wrestling show to them. It's the life. I get Facebook messages daily from fans, still about the day, because they feel like they relate to wrestling on a personal level. It's more, let's say, it's more to them than just a show. It's the thing they look forward to every 2 months, to come to the wrestling show and be free of any other stress they've got in their life, and to just see the favourite people, the favourite superstars, the wrestlers, and everyone involved in the show. They feel just as much as part of the show as we are. And it was to see that come back and the crowd reactions, and yeah, I definitely knew Morecambe Wrestling was back.
I love the theme, the kind of the pirate theme of Odyssey Pro Wrestling, which I'm guessing that kind of is a nod to the fact that you're by the sea in Morecambe, the seaside tradition. All the show names have got that. We mentioned Set Sail, Buried Treasure,
Summer Waters, Buried Treasure, like I say, and then Warner Shaw, the WrestleMania, so to speak, of Morecambe Wrestling.
We'll talk about that in a minute. But Buried Treasure, last year you won the championship. You became the Odyssey Pro Wrestling champion and a two-time Morecambe Wrestling champion. How did that feel the second time compared to the first?
The exact same feeling. It was to be the champion of Morecambe. Like I say, it's special. I wasn't just doing it for myself. I was doing it for the fans as well, because there's nothing like it, Greg. There's nowhere like it at all. It was. Early in the night, I faced Sam Bailey. Unfortunately, during that match, I did injure my knee. Went backstage, got strapped up, and it was a tough test for me mentally as well as physically to go on to the final and face Two-Bit. But I knew I couldn't let the Morecambe fans down. Their passion they've got for this wrestling is unmatched. So for me not to go out into the final and just give up was not even in my question in the end. I knew I had to get up, keep going, and I gave it my all in a 20-minute main event against Two-Bit, and eventually hit the Hunter's Arrow, 1, 2, 3, and I was a two-time champ.
So let's talk about April the 9th, back at Alhambra Live, War on the Shore. 17 years War on the Shore's been going. I remember the first one, 2005. Raven was in the main event.
Raven was it against Alex Shane?
It was, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
2005. So War on the Shore has got a lot of tradition, and you're in this main event defending your championship against Andre Dekker, who we've talked about, who you've got history with, going back to when you used to train together.
History.
Morecambe Wrestling.
Massive history. So let's start with Andre Dekker. He was, like I say, I think I've known Andre Dekker for nearly 10 years now. He's trained with me. We've travelled around the UK together, stayed in hotels, we went to WrestleMania together on holiday. We were good friends at one time, but he got a bit of a chip on his shoulder and a few people in his ear, and he was in teams with, like I said, teams with people like James Drake, Barricade, Alton Thorne, and it became this whole new. He's now quite the drinker, so he's like I say, I've wrestled him in Alpha Omega, beat him. I wrestled him at Target Wrestling, came out on top again. So this is our third meeting now, and I plan to do the same.
So what's going on with him and Chris Brooker? What's happening here? Tell us a little bit, because I'm a bit out of the loop with this.
So Chris Brooker has came into Odyssey Pro Wrestling as a manager. He is now forming his own stable called The Spotlight. It now involves Andre Dekker and a tag team called Davies and Rogan, who are taking the British wrestling scene by storm. They're the three, and they've got a manager called Kelly as well. They say they want to take the spotlight in Morecambe Wrestling, which I've got. I've got the spotlight. I'm the champion. They want what I've got, but they'll have to go through me first.
So he's one of your opponents. Now tell me about RPD. Because me and RPD, I don't know if you know this, me and RPD go back a long way. I used to announce.
I was speaking to him about the
boxing matches back in Syndicate. Yeah,
the Syndicate.
In Blackpool. Yeah. That's right.
I've seen. He was actually showing me some photos the other day. Ryan's a great friend of mine. We train together at his gym. We go on a local park here at Stanley Park in Blackpool. We train outside. We train boxing. We train fitness. We train wrestling. He's a Blackpool lad, and I think Blackpool lads fit together. We're very, very good friends. He's more than just a wrestler on the show to me. Ryan's a good friend of mine. But
is there a little bit of a rivalry, professional rivalry, because he's challenging you for the title, and from what I can gather, he's becoming quite a big crowd favourite in Morecambe. Is there a part of you that thinks, hang on a minute, that's my territory, mate?
there's always going to be that. There's, like I say, a professional rivalry there. Ryan's he's only been wrestling for 3 years since his first training session, and he's took the British wrestling team like nothing I've ever seen before. He's everywhere. He's main eventing. He's one of the biggest. He's one of the poster boys of many shows. But this is Morecambe. It's Hunter's house. This is where I stay. This is my proving ground, and I'm not going to let him take that easily. He's a good friend, but I'm sorry, when it gets in the ring and that bell rings, it's every man for himself and it's a threat. But don't get me wrong, at the end, when I am victorious, I'll shake the man's hand and he'll shake mine back, because there's that level of respect for each other.
I mean, a triple threat match is interesting as a champion. It creates you with a new set of challenges, because I don't know, I mean, the rules usually, I'm assuming these will be the same on April the 9th. You don't have to actually get beaten to lose the title, is that right?
I don't have to get pinned. I don't have to get submitted. There's no disqualifications, no count-outs. It's triple threat, anything goes. Andre Dekker's got his little goons in Reese and Rogan knocking about. I hope they don't pop it at any time, but I'm more than ready if they do. He's got Chris Brooker on his side who can get involved at any time, and I'm more than ready to smack that man straight in his mouth. And like I say, I don't actually have to be involved in the pinfall to lose my title, so I'm going to have to be alert and ready for every single second of that match.
And Dekker and RPD have had a bit of a set to on a podcast, I've noticed this week. So there's quite a bit of no love lost between your two challengers. That could be something that you
definitely not. They've been feuding since our first show at Set Sail. RPD was making his debut. Actually signed his Odyssey Pro Wrestling contract on that show, and unfortunately at the time, General Manager Ethan Edwards had not signed Andre Dekker to a contract. So Andre Dekker came from the crowd into the ring and got involved in RPD's match and hit him with his finished move, Hair of the Dog, and cost him a match against Sam Bailey. Later on the next show, he did that, and he's been on Ryan's case every show since. He's Ryan's tag team partner, Rick Marcus. He's attacked him. He actually smashed a bottle over bottled Rick Marcus. He went to bottle RPD. Like I say, he's got involved. He cost RPD the Rumble. RPD was in the Golden Chance Rumble at the time. To win this title match itself for this show. He'd overcome 20 other people, 18 other wrestlers at the time. So he thought it was 19. But when Andre Dekker got thrown out the ring, he didn't go over the top rope. Chris Booker then hid Andre Dekker under the ring. When RP Davies thought he'd won, he was on the top rope. Andre Dekker slipped in, popped him over the top rope, and stole the victory.
So that's why they're both challenging you. There was that controversy over who actually won that Rumble, and now we're going to find out whether one of them can become the champion, or whether you're going to stand tall at the end of it, Ryan, still the Odyssey Pro Wrestling champion.
Yeah, so at the end of that show, I main evented that show in a main event against Nathan Cruz in probably one of my favourite matches I've had. Nathan Cruz is, how that man is not signed to a professional wrestling company is absolutely beyond me. Absolutely beyond me. How he's not made on telly every week beyond me. Is an absolute superstar. But again, Morecambe's Hunter's house. You don't come into Morecambe and take my title away easy. And I got the victory again. After the match, though, Nathan Cruz, in a fashion he's always been, the show stealer professional, grabbed the Odyssey title and smashed it straight over my face when I weren't looking. Took my eye off the ball for a second and he took me out. Andre Dekker came out, hit me with his finisher twice, hit me with the hair of the dog. And he was this close from cashing in. He's wanted to cash in his Odyssey Pro Wrestling title shot. But, like I say, Blackpool boy, RPD came. He made the save. Yeah, I didn't see him make the save at the time. Unfortunately, I was still out. So RPD made the save. Ethan Edwards came out. The general manager made the triple threat main event for the next show. And unfortunately, this is where Martin and RPD's paths crossed a little bit of tension. I was walking back. I didn't even know RPD came out. I was out cold from the belt shot and two finishes. I stumbled back and I thought it was Andre Dekker still in the ring, but it'd take me out again. And I went to grab him for the Hunter's Arrow, but it was RPD. And I didn't know it at the time, but I turned around, RPD was there, and I apologised. Then I looked down and he had the Odyssey Pro Wrestling title in his hand. That's mine. so he went to hand me the title. I went to walk off and he just wouldn't let go. Like I say, there's that professional side. No matter, you can be best friends with anyone, but everyone wants to be the champion. So, like I say, there's that level of respect, but I know in that triple threat, no matter what, it's every man for himself and everyone wants to be the champion. Everyone wants what I've got.
Yeah. Well, what a great backstory and what a great triple threat match it's going to be. You know, three outstanding competitors, like you say, all battling to become the champion. And just a few final questions, Ryan. First of all, just a general question about pro wrestling itself. We've talked about how massively popular it is in Morecambe, but it's also massively popular all over the world. What is the reason why you think professional wrestling is so popular? Why people love it so much?
I like to class it as, I call it physical theatre. It's a theatre, it's a show. People can connect to these characters in different ways. They can connect to someone through a television screen on Corrie or EastEnders. You've got all these characters, but no one can connect because it's not really relatable stories. Whereas wrestling brings real stories in life and times run by 10, and people can relate on a different personal level with wrestlers. They can see themselves in certain wrestlers and they can believe that these wrestlers are superhuman and can do things that they could never even dream of doing, but fans live through their favourite wrestlers and it connects on a different level. Like I say, when I was younger, I've seen these different characters like The Undertaker, like Mankind, The Rock, Stone Cold, characters you never even thought about, but battling each other, having different stories. And it was, like I say, nothing I've ever, it was nothing I've never seen before in my life, but it was different and it was its own thing. And like I say, it just can't, I don't feel it can connect in a way with fans in anything like pro wrestling.
And what do you think it is about Morecambe? Why is pro wrestling so special in Morecambe? Can you put that into words?
Morecambe has always been. There's many British wrestling companies around Britain, but some shows just have a match for the sake of having a match. every single match in Morecambe, there's a story, there's a reason. There's some wrestlers have more than one story, so the fans can they know why every match is happening. They know where it's going. They can see the good guy, bad guy, good, evil, and the fans just eat up like nothing I've ever seen. Morecambe, like I say, as we've mentioned before, the Morecambe Divas, they've not missed a show since I've been there 10 years anyway. They've been VIP.
It's a lot longer, believe me.
Yeah, trust me, that's what I'm saying. That's just in my time, 10 years, they've been front row every show, VIP tickets to meet the wrestlers, they're there before the doors even open, and they create this energy that not many other wrestling companies can get. They create this energy that just spreads through the entire crowd. And if you ask every wrestler backstage at Odyssey Pro Wrestling if there's anywhere like Morecambe, they'll all tell you no, because Morecambe Wrestling is special, and there's nothing like it.
Well, I still get messages on Twitter from Spud, Drake Maverick, who was a regular at Morecambe back in the day, and he says exactly the same thing. And that's a guy who's working now for WWE.
I remember I wrestled going back to Alpha Omega. I wrestled Zack Gibson for the Alpha Omega Championship at the time, and he then tweeted afterwards. He said, "It's real in Morecambe," and the guy just said, "Drake Massive," retweeted and replied. He said, "It always has been," and I can't agree more. It's always been special since my very first Vendetta show. It's been special, and it's still special today.
So, final question then, Ryan. What is it about you that you think has allowed the Morecambe wrestling fans to take you to their hearts? You are their champion. It's Hunter's House, like you've said several times. And obviously you still want it to be Hunter's House after War on the Shore on April the 9th. What is it about you in particular that you feel has made you what you are in Morecambe wrestling?
Like I say, the journey I've been on. It was, like I say, from this overweight kid, cameraman, just helping out on shows. The fans have seen me progress show by show by show by show. I wasn't a cameraman then. All of a sudden, I was an amazing wrestler. They've seen me go from being able to do a wrist lock to being able to do a little bit more on the next show, a little bit more on the next show, a little bit more, to eventually working from the bottom of the open match all the way to the main event. And they've seen me grow, and they connect with me on a personal level now. And there's no, like I said, there's no connection like it for the Morecambe fans.
How old are you now, Ryan?
I'm 24.
24. So you started out training, like we said, 14, 15. So they've literally seen you grow from a boy to a man.
From a boy to a man, yeah, that's it. I remember we played one of my old entry videos on the first Odyssey Pro show. It's my original entry video that the tech guy, Brian, who is absolutely amazing, made for me at the time. And it was me as, like I say, a young boy on this entry video. I was watching it, and it was crazy to see where I've come from to where I am now. It's unbelievable.
And April the 9th, how's that show going to end?
Same way it always ends. Hunter on top. Stood on that top rope, title in hand, Morecambe fans erupting. Okay, well, I wish you all the very best of luck. Thank you very much, Greg.